The night was designed to feel effortless. That was the word she used when we first sat down to plan it, effortless. Not extravagant, not excessive, just a quiet kind of elegance. Candles instead of overhead lights. Soft jazz in the background. Tapas on small plates instead of a full dinner. She said she wanted the kind of evening where conversations drifted like smoke and time forgot how to keep track. I wanted her to feel like the center of it. Not the stage, but the glow. So I hired a private bartender. Not just someone from an agency. I asked around, did the research, found someone whose name floated through quiet recommendations. The kind of bartender who didn't just pour drinks, but composed them. Someone who moved like liquid and listened like marble. He arrived an hour early. Slim, well-pressed shirt, clean-cut jawline. The kind of smile that had been practiced behind bars long before it reached our home. He set up quickly, laying his tools on the countertop like instruments before a concert. His bottles were arranged not just by type, but by tone. Citrus here. Dark liquors there. Bitters and botanicals like spices on a palette. She noticed him immediately, not in a way that alarmed me. In the way she noticed design, details, harmony, care. It was one of the things I loved most about her. Her eye for intention, her ability to see the story in an arrangement. When he handed her the first cocktail, a gin creation with rosemary smoke and a salted rim, she tilted her head and said, "Wow, he's really good." Then, after another sip, "He's got very skilled hands." It was the kind of compliment you'd say about a musician. Or a sculptor. Admiring, a little playful, but not yet suggestive. I smiled and raised my glass. "Only the best for you." He smiled too, the professional kind. A nod that meant thank you but didn't linger. I should have noticed how easily they fell into rhythm. She stayed near the bar longer than I expected. Talking with guests. Yes, but always close enough to accept the next drink. To admire the next flourish. He carved a twist of orange peel over her champagne flute and handed it to her like it was an offering. She laughed, called it a citrus crown. He bowed theatrically. Everyone around chuckled. It was charming, harmless, or so it seemed. At one point, she looked over at me, just briefly, and smiled. "You're the host tonight," she said, brushing her hand lightly across my shoulder. "Go mingle. Let me handle this side." This side, meaning the bar. I nodded. Of course. She was radiant, self-possessed. It was her gift. To hold a space without forcing it. To put people at ease. That's why I trusted her. That's why I never questioned her presence, near the bar. Near him, she was simply being gracious. She always had a warmth that made people gravitate toward her. I moved through the room, laughing with colleagues, topping off someone's wine, shaking hands with friends I hadn't seen since last fall. Every time I glanced back, she was there, shoulder to shoulder with the bartender, exchanging a joke, watching him work. But it was a party, and I had planned it to feel effortless. It didn't occur to me that the same attention I hired to elevate the night might have found its focus on something else entirely. It didn't occur to me that someone I tipped generously was stirring more than just drinks. But even if it had, even if there was a sliver of unease, buried somewhere between the citrus peel and the soft glint in her eyes, I would have pushed it down. Because love, like good liquor, teaches you to ignore the burn. And I was drunk on the idea that effortlessness was something we shared. Not something that could be used against me. The night had softened. The laughter had thinned into gentle murmurs. Plates now sat empty, abandoned mid-conversation. Wine glasses were half full or forgotten altogether, glistening beneath the kitchen pendant lights. It was that golden hour of every house party, the in-between, when celebration transitions into goodbye. And warmth begins to lean toward weariness. I walked a few of our oldest friends out to the front garden. Friends from college, people who'd seen me in terrible jeans and sleepless cramming nights. Who had watched me grow up, stumble into adulthood, and find her. We stood in a loose half-circle by the gate. A little tipsy, arms slung over shoulders, voices just a notch too loud for the quiet street. "Man," one of them said, slapping my back, "you throw a hell of a night." It's her touch, I admitted. She's the magic. I just pay for the bar. We laughed. They raised their glasses one last time. The moon caught on their rims like silver flares. Seriously though, another said, this was perfect, intimate. The drinks were ridiculous. Who was that guy? Private hire, I said. Artisan bartender, worth every cent. They nodded in approval, eyes sleepy but impressed. One by one, they hugged me goodbye. Familiar embraces, the kind that press years between two people like dried flowers in an old book. As they headed toward the cars, I lingered on the porch. The door was still open. The music inside had faded to instrumentals. Just the soft tinkling of keys and strings. I turned back to glance into the house. And paused. Through the glass panel beside the front door, I scanned the bar corner. The space where, an hour ago, she'd stood laughing over garnishes and highball glasses. Where he'd passed her drinks like quiet spells. Now it was empty. No sign of her. No sign of him. The bar looked too clean. Too finished. Like something had been wiped away. Not just physically, but intentionally. I tilted my head, trying to hear movement. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Not even the sound of glass on marble. Just that persistent instrumental score. Soothing and oblivious. But I didn't panic. Why would I? He was probably packing up his tools. Bottles back in cases. Bar mats rolled. Jiggers stowed. She had likely gone upstairs. Kicked off her heels. Maybe rinsing off makeup. Maybe lying back on the bed. Exhausted in that glowing, proud way she always had after hosting. There was nothing in that moment that demanded suspicion. Nothing out of place. Except for the slight stillness. The kind of quiet that settles before you realize something is missing. I walked back into the house. Unhurried. Calm. Tired. I didn't know it yet. But that was the last time I'd ever waved goodnight without doubting what waited behind the door I walked back through. Not because I saw something. But because I didn't. When I stepped back into the house, it was quieter than it should have been. Not empty, not eerie, just the kind of quiet that feels curated, as if the room had been told to behave, to appear normal, to wear its best mask. The bar was immaculate, wiped down to a gloss, bottles lined up like soldiers, towels folded with near-clinical precision. The citrus peels were gone, the cocktail shakers rinsed and stacked. Even the garnish tray, which had been a colorful chaos of mint and sliced fruit, now sat closed, tucked neatly into the corner. It didn't just look clean. It looked edited, like the aftermath of a scene being erased. The bartender was gone. No sign of him. No duffel. No bar tools. No thank you wave from the door. Just a soft trace of lavender oil lingering in the air. The one she always diffused when guests were over. And then I saw her. She was curled into the far corner of the sofa. Barefoot now, heels discarded near the coffee table. Her posture was relaxed. Almost too relaxed. Like someone who had just completed a performance and was letting the curtain fall. In her hand was a glass of red wine. Stemmed, elegant, untouched. She looked up and smiled. Not wide. Not overly warm. Just adequate. The kind of smile people give when they think you've missed something but are too polite to ask. He's gone, she said, just left after cleaning up. She sipped. I walked further in. The wine was dark against the glass. Garnet, full-bodied, probably the Syrah we'd saved. I remember thinking it was too heavy for the hour. Too rich to be an afterthought. But I said nothing. Need help with anything else? I asked. Gently, not accusing, not suspicious, just offering. She shook her head. No need, just a few glasses left. I've got it. I nodded. The moment should have ended there. Should have folded neatly like a clean napkin after dinner. But then I noticed her glass again. It was sweating. Just slightly. Not from the wine. Room temperature red doesn't do that. But from the base. From the layer of ice cubes inside. Ice. In Syrah. She never drank red with ice. And yet here it was. 3 perfectly cubed pieces slowly spinning in a glass of red that hadn't been touched long enough to chill the wine fully. The cubes hadn't melted, not even softened at the edges. Which meant they were fresh. Which meant, He hadn't left long ago. He hadn't left at all. Not when she said he did. I stared for just a second too long. She noticed, tilted her head. "Something wrong?" she asked. I smiled. "No, just tired." And I was tired, but not in the way she thought. Tired of sensing half-truths dressed as hospitality. Tired of noticing the little things that ask too many questions. Tired of having to do the math between what's said and what's shown. I didn't confront her. Not then. I just sat in the chair opposite, watching the ice float in the kind of drink she would have once sent back at a restaurant. And I thought, there's a kind of cold that doesn't come from ice. It comes from timing, and from the way something supposedly ended, a few minutes too late. It was morning, the kind of soft morning that almost convinces you nothing has changed. Light broke across the blinds in lines too gentle to feel intrusive. The house smelled of lemon soap and the faint afterburn of candle wax. Everything appeared as it should. Except for me. Habit is a quiet tyrant. It leads you with invisible strings. Rituals you follow without thinking. And so I did what I always did the morning after hosting. Sat down with my coffee and checked the security footage. Not because I was suspicious. Because the system was automatic. It recorded every evening event from midnight to 6. A habit born from a break-in years ago. The camera on the second-floor hallway caught everything: entrances, exits, sometimes cats knocking over vases, once a raccoon on the windowsill. I didn't expect to see anything that morning, but I watched anyway. At 1:27 a.m., the footage came alive. He emerged, the bartender, from my bedroom. He didn't creep, didn't sneak, he walked like he belonged there. Shirt unbuttoned halfway, hair ruffled not from wind but from fingers. His gait wasn't hurried, it was slow, controlled, like someone who had been somewhere intimate and unafraid. I paused the video, rewound it, watched again. There was no panic, no hesitation. He didn't glance over his shoulder, didn't adjust his clothing in haste. He simply stepped into the hallway and disappeared off frame. A few minutes passed on the timeline. And then, she stepped out of the same room. No robe, no messy hair to excuse. Just her dress from the party, slightly creased, as if it had been removed and returned quickly. Her expression wasn't troubled, it wasn't anything at all. She moved like someone who had nothing to hide, not because she was innocent, but because she had already justified it to herself. That was the part that hollowed me. The calm. There's a difference between guilt and acceptance. Guilt makes people anxious, rushed. Acceptance makes them serene. She was serene, as if the night had followed a logic she was entirely comfortable with. I let the footage play on. Empty hallway, no one else, no explanation queued up to soften what I'd seen. And I realized, sound wasn't necessary. The silence was its own confession. No dramatic soundtrack, no voices raised or promises broken mid-sentence. Just movement, just presence, just the casual, practiced rhythm of betrayal unbothered by discovery. I didn't rewind a third time. There was nothing new to find. I closed the laptop gently, as though being too rough with it would suggest I hadn't already decided something quietly. Deep inside myself, some truths don't need confrontation. They just need to be witnessed once, fully, unblinkingly, so you know they are real. What they had wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a drunken mistake. It was allowed, sanctioned, carried out with all the calm of a routine they had somehow rehearsed in the privacy of my blind spots. I stared out the window. The street was quiet. A jogger passed. Somewhere nearby, a bird started to sing. And I thought, even birds sing after storms. But not all storms leave visible damage. Some just rearrange the air inside a house, so subtly you don't notice you've stopped breathing. Until now. There are moments when the silence inside your chest becomes louder than anything spoken in the world around you. That morning, after I watched the footage, after I saw him walk out of my bedroom and her follow minutes later with the calm of someone returning from something sanctioned, I didn't rage. I didn't call her into the room. I didn't demand, or plead, or scream. I just sat there, for a long time, not because I didn't feel, but because I was learning the language of stillness. The kind of stillness that's not passive, but precise. A quiet you choose, not because you're afraid of confrontation, but because you've finally accepted there's nothing left to rescue. There was a clarity that morning, cold and exacting, the kind that doesn't shiver or shake, it just is. I closed the laptop, reached for my phone, and opened the camera archive app. I scrubbed back to the moment. 1:27 a.m. Trimmed the clip down. Bartender exits the bedroom. Pause. Then she exits. Composed. I didn't title the file. I didn't overthink it. I exported it. Watched the progress bar crawl forward. Then I opened our text thread. So many messages lived there. Grocery lists, memes, Sunday photos of her wrapped in blankets. The last one had been from me. The night before, need anything from the bar before last round. She hadn't replied. Maybe she was already with him. I attached the video. No message, no caption, no question, no punctuation, just the clip. And then I hit send. It took 6 seconds to deliver. I watched the blue bar crawl, feeling each moment like a needle pulling thread through the seam of something once called home. Then I waited. I didn't refresh. I didn't pace. I just watched the screen. Watched the word delivered change to read. 2 minutes. That's how long it took her to see it. And then, nothing. No dots. No response. No explanation typed and deleted. No excuses offered. Not even the cowardly ones. Just the digital equivalent of someone watching a bomb roll into the room and choosing to say nothing at all. And in that silence, I felt something settle inside me. Not a collapse. Not even grief. It was more like a door closing gently somewhere deep in the house of me. A quiet, final click. There's a kind of guilt that shouts. But this wasn't it. This was the kind that doesn't bother defending itself because it already knows it's been seen. The kind that wears no disguise. The kind that doesn't tremble, because it believes you won't do anything. She had read it. That was her confession. Her silence was her plea. Not for mercy, but for avoidance. And in that stillness, I finally understood. Some betrayals don't need to be dragged into the light. They walk into it on their own. They reveal themselves in posture, in timing, in the absence of denial. They name themselves. And all you have to do is stop trying to rename them. I put the phone down, made coffee, watched the sun come up like it had no idea someone's world had just quietly ended. And maybe that's the real story. Not that she cheated, but that when shown the truth, she didn't say a single word. Because she didn't need to. Because some sins are so familiar. They answer to silence. The next day, I returned to the bar. Not a bar in town. Not some anonymous lounge with dim lights and louder regrets. I returned to the bar in my own home. The one I built. Chosen wood grain. Selected marble. A centerpiece to evenings I once imagined we'd grow old around. It still smelled faintly of zest and rosemary. Of all the little things he used to garnish the glasses like charms. The bottles stood like trophies untouched. Their angles precise. Their purpose betrayed. I sat on the same stool I'd perched on 100 times before. But today it felt like a witness stand. I reached for the Syrah. Same bottle. Same vintage. I poured slowly, watching the wine glide into the glass with elegance that mocked me. It clung to the edges like memory. Deep and red and full of everything I'd wanted this night to be. Beside me, on the counter, I placed the receipt. The tip I'd left him. Generous. Too generous, enough to buy silence, or maybe, enough to buy complicity. I had written a small note on it the night before. Thanks for taking care of everyone tonight. I stared at those words now, printed in my own handwriting, suddenly obscene in their sincerity. That was the part that stung most, my effort. Not just the wine, but the candles she loved. The playlist I curated from scratch, blending Norah Jones and instrumental jazz. So the music wouldn't compete with conversation. The tapas I ordered from the caterer she followed on Instagram for months. The lighting dimmed to the exact warmth she once called honey lit. I didn't just try. I designed. I created a moment meant to be savored. And she let someone else drink it. That night wasn't ruined by a bad pour. It wasn't soured by cheap ingredients or a misplaced garnish. It was ruined by a choice, made somewhere between a flirtation disguised as wit and footsteps taken toward a room that wasn't meant for him. I sipped the wine. It was good, deep, dry, structured, but it didn't taste like anything. Not anymore. It was just liquid, elegant, expensive, and empty, like the room around me. I had once believed that if I could get everything just right, the drink, the music, the mood, I could insulate us from drift, from boredom, from betrayal. But the truth is, you can craft the finest experience in the world and still have someone choose to ruin it. Because loyalty doesn't respond to effort. It responds to character. And character doesn't bloom in candlelight. It doesn't awaken with jazz. It reveals itself in silence. In the minutes after the last guest leaves. In the footstep you don't hear coming back down the stairs. I thought of the video. Of the way he walked out. Calm, unbothered. As though the bed he'd left wasn't mine. As though the woman he'd left behind was never mine either. I thought of her, reading the message. 2 minutes. No reply. Some wines, they say, improve with time. But some betrayals don't. They just steep. They grow quieter, deeper, until they stain everything you once called yours. I looked around the room again. Nothing had moved. Nothing had broken. The betrayal had left no mess, only absence. And in that absence, I saw the lesson clearly. You can buy the bottle. You can tip the hand that pours it. You can set the mood, the tone, the scene, but you cannot purchase what must be chosen. You cannot buy loyalty. You cannot earn faithfulness with ambience. Because betrayal doesn't come from the glass. It comes from the hand that holds it. I finished the wine, and it tasted like truth.